I think that it's really important for people to understand that when someone in your family is transgender or gay or anything like that, it's a coming out process for the entire family.
Welcome to My Healthy Mind. I'm Elizabeth Atkins. We understand that the new, emerging, and changing sexual identifications may cause confusion and misunderstanding about sexual and gender labels, terminology, and dialogue. But while some of this may seem bewildering, and for those going through it, frightening as well, most of us really do want to understand what it all means, and to understand the people in our communities and in our families who are struggling with their own gender and sexual identity, especially in terms of how they're perceived and treated by those around them. Today we're talking with Hunter and his mom, Roz, who know a thing or two about this very personal journey, who have experienced this transition both as an individual and as a family, and who've navigated this journey in a way that stands as a beautiful example of how everyone should navigate all of life's uncharted territory. Hunter, Roz, welcome to My Healthy Mind.
Thank you.
Hunter, obviously you've transitioned from female to male. Can you please tell us when you started to feel that you were born in the wrong body, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of always knew that something was wrong. Ever since I was little, there was just this kind of weight on my shoulders that I didn't understand. But at the same time, like, I didn't have the vocabulary to express what I was feeling. It wasn't until I think about 5th grade that I had heard the term transgender. And everything just kind of clicked into place, like all those like negative feelings and all that, like the wrongness that I felt in my gut, just kind of, it all clicked into place, and I knew for the first time that I knew it was wrong. And that kind of gave me hope.
Can you talk about the wrong that you felt? You wore boys' clothes, you felt like a boy from the inside out. Can you describe that?
Yeah, I mean, I was never a girly girl, never. I always loved superheroes. I always wore boys' clothes. I played with the boys. I played in the mud. I would go and climb trees. But it really, I wouldn't say that I felt like a boy. Because like in my head, like, that wasn't possible. So like I didn't even give it a thought, you know. Not until I heard the term that was like, oh, like, that makes sense. Like, I never really thought like, oh, like I'm a boy. Like, not. I guess I think the first time I actually said I was a boy, I was 6.
Yeah.
About 6 years old in a tub, and I looked at my mom and I said, "Mom, I'm a boy." And then I never said it again.
When did you first hear the term transgender?
On YouTube in 5th grade. I was just kind of browsing on YouTube, looking at like cover songs and stuff like that, and I found a YouTuber that was he was just covering a song that I liked, and then I noticed, like, you see like the suggested videos, and it's talking about his transition. I was like, what's this? And then he talked about going to see like an endocrinologist, and I learned that he was born female. He said the term transgender and explained it. Like, I was like, oh, like, that's me. And for the first time, I was just like at peace. I was like, I knew what was going on. Like, I didn't know where it was going to go from there, but I knew what was happening.
Just to be clear, this was before the word transgender was common knowledge. Can you talk about that? Like, you had no idea.
Yeah, there is nothing out there.
I think the language in the conversation up until that point was about drag queens and using the words transsexual or transvestite, which kind of fetishized the behaviors. So it wasn't really talked about in a way that was
inclusive,
intelligent, inclusive.
Yeah, I mean, that stigma still, I mean, even so many years later, that stigma still affects the trans community. We're still, a lot of the times, we're still seen as sexual objects, as not people. Whether people realize it or not, which makes dating hard because people fetishize your body instead of learning who you are. So it makes dating and romance really hard to find someone that's interested in you, not what you've been through. But yeah, that was mostly what people thought when I would say like, yeah, like I'm transgender. They're like, what? You're 14, and not realizing really what it meant.
So how did you feel once you recognized this?
I mean, I felt like kind of like the entire world kind of opened up. Everything made sense. Things weren't perfect. I mean, it was scary to know that like I was different. But at the same time, it was a weight off my shoulders to know, like, to finally know what was going on.
So did you tell anyone?
Not for a while. I didn't mention it until 7th grade when I mentioned it to my friends.
What happened when you mentioned it to your friends?
I think I really just said, like, I'm transgender, and I kind of just explained what that meant. And I mean, they had been my friends since 1st grade. I wasn't too worried. They were supportive. They never ever questioned who I was, and they just kind of rolled with it. Just whatever I needed, they helped me.
So we had no idea, of course, because he was still researching and had told some friends, but we knew that things were off. You know, there was a lot of struggle going on that wasn't, at least what I didn't think was typical middle school angst and behaviors, but we didn't know what it was.
But did you notice anything earlier?
You know, we just said, you know, she's a tomboy. There were lots of like little things that I just sort of chalked up as like, okay, a little odd, but.
And this was way before the word transgender was a household word.
Yeah, way before.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So then, when did you tell your parents?
I didn't really like come out to them. It was more of like an angst thing.
It was situational.
We had just come back from another failed shopping expedition because I always wanted to get boys' clothes, and my mom didn't understand. And I mean, I'd throw a fit because like I did not want girls' clothes. I didn't like blouses. I didn't like anything. I just was very uncomfortable in any of that stuff. And then I had also been wanting to cut my hair. And so just kind of with those two things, like whenever I showed my mom like a haircut, it was always like kind of like a male haircut, you know? And so like finally my mom asked like that night, like, are you trying to look like a boy? And I said yes, and walked upstairs and got followed, of course. But I mean, that's just kind of how it happened, how like it came out. It was more of like an outburst than actual like planned coming out.
That's when he spilled the beans, and I had no idea. I don't think I had ever heard the word transgender. I didn't know what any of it meant. He was throwing out terminology.
So I had been researching for years.
2 years.
I already knew all like the acronyms. I already knew like how everything worked, and so I was just saying is like that I like is I had 7 years. My mom had about 7 minutes to kind of catch up.
Yeah. And what did that feel like for you, Roz?
You know, I was worried. I knew that I would do anything to help him, and I think I even said that you know, my goal for both my kids has always been that they're happy, healthy, productive human beings, and that they can find love, and that they find a career that they love. And I didn't want anything to get in the way of that for Hunter. So, you know, right off the bat, I said, you know, we'll figure it out. But inside, I didn't I didn't know what this meant. I didn't know the word. I didn't know the language. He was already talking about going on hormones and that he needed to see a therapist in order to go on hormones. And he wanted a chest binder to hide his feminine-looking chest. And it was just like too much, too fast. I didn't know what to do with all of that information, so.
Hunter, obviously your mom was very non-judgmental. So how did your friends react?
My friends were the same way. I mean, some of them were confused, but they didn't really let that on. They kind of understood like this is something that was really important to me, and they just kind of rolled with it. They helped me when it came to switching the name that I used in school. We did it in a way where like they just started, like instead of like making an announcement, they just started kind of using my chosen name Hunter in school, and eventually everybody else caught on as well. So I didn't have to have that like big announcement, that embarrassment, like that face of rejection. I didn't have to deal with that. I just kind of like, they helped like a smooth transition.
But that wasn't until high school.
That was until high school. But I mean, up until then it was, I mean, my friends were completely non-judgmental. They didn't care. They still saw me as me. I mean, I was still their best friend. And I mean, I think that my experience is kind of different because I wasn't in a public school. In the schools, it wasn't like terrible, you know, like there's like some like juvenile teasing or whatever, but there was never really that like, just like picking on one kid. That never really happened. I never really needed that, like needed anyone to like come and stand up for me, because that just like, we were all taught to respect each other, even though like maybe we didn't agree with each other. It was more of a like, are you okay? Like, what do you need? And it was always something that like, I knew that if I needed anything, that they would be there.
So Roz, you said that you believe all families and communities should react this way, and especially in addressing bullying toward all kids and people.
Absolutely. I think that it's about kindness and it's about acceptance, and we need to embrace those values as families, as communities, within our schools. There seems to be a lot of inconsistency in the way the schools set their policies. Some are very tolerant of the bullying and look the other way. Others have zero tolerance. But I think if we're talking about, you know, the future of our communities and our kids are our future, we need to teach them. We need to embrace that at home, embrace that, the kindness, the, you know, loving the differences, accepting that we are all unique, and that it's not okay for schools to tolerate behavior that isolates any one child, regardless of their difference. And that's something that, you know, we believe very strongly in as a family, and that we talk about a lot within our communities.
My job was causing me so much stress.
I felt disconnected and frightened.
I felt so isolated.
I was beginning to feel trapped, depressed. I never expected that to happen to me.
We think nobody else feels the pain that we feel, but that is so untrue.
It's good to be able to talk about it.
I was able to seek help. I found it from Team Wellness.
It's a sense of freedom.
Team Wellness Center. You are not alone.
So Hunter, when you actually did come out, what was the transition like?
Well, I started my transition when I was 14. I started with hormone therapy. Basically I was taking male hormones, and that way my voice would deepen like it has, and it also allows me to grow facial hair. And then once I was 16, I wanted chest surgery. Since I had already gone through female puberty, I had a female chest, and I wasn't comfortable with that at all. So I would start to wear baggy clothes, and so anything to hide my figure. But once I think I was 17, I got surgery. I got top surgery over the summer, and I'm not self-conscious anymore. And it's, I would say I'm fully transitioned.
One of the things that was so difficult for me, I was 100% accepting, on his side, looking for any resources I could find for him. It was a period of time that, for me personally, brought a lot of sadness because it was the reality. It was the contrast and the reality that this is who my child is, and he's not going to be this lovely young woman, he's going to be a young man. And so while some families talk about mourning the loss of a child, I didn't feel that. It wasn't that kind of grieving, but it was having to come to terms with what our new reality was going to be.
And another reality is you've said that Hunter has a very unique perspective in that he's been a brother and a sister, a son and a daughter.
Yeah, and we talk about that all the time, that, you know, not many people can say that they've lived as female and lived as male, or lived as different genders at some point in their life. And I think that, you know, you've embraced that, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's something that I don't take for granted. It's something where I can see both sides of issues. And I can see like why feminism is so important, but I can also see what men have to deal with growing up as well, and learning to hide their emotions and that form of toxic masculinity. So I do see both sides. I see the stark contrast about how people are treated differently, even if it's just the slightest thing. Because I've experienced both of it, and so I'm able to understand that there's problems on both sides. But this way I can share, I can talk to my female friends about stuff that they're going through, and I can also talk to my guy friends about stuff that they're going through.
Roz, you've talked about how it was difficult to flip the switch. Can you talk about that in terms of pronouns and having anybody to talk to?
So we had months before Hunter said, I'd like to use male pronouns now, and I'd like to choose a new name. It was just, I went for a period of time without using any pronouns. I'd say my child.
I never even noticed that.
Yeah, and I was, you know, I was very respectful of what Hunter's wishes were, but it was hard. It was hard to say he or my son. And I very distinctly remember buying, I think it was a birthday card that was happy birthday to my son. And that was a big deal for me because I was finally acknowledging the change. You know, it was like the public acknowledgement and being able to actually say those words. So that took a while.
And so, Roz, you were also doing research on your own. Can you take us through what were you finding in your research?
It was brick wall after brick wall, and that was heartbreaking. I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find resources to help my child. I would break down after every call because I couldn't get him help. I mean, imagine if you had a child who had a serious illness and you couldn't find the right medicine, or you couldn't find a specialist to treat them, and they were dying because you couldn't find them help. I mean, that was the situation that we were in. And I finally, I talked to our pediatrician, who was a lifesaver, and she helped us find someone who could start treating Hunter and who could support us.
And what about your husband?
He was a little skeptical initially, but all in all very supportive. It took my husband a little while to do his own research, where he came around and was like, okay, now I understand what this means.
So Hunter, why did you wait a year after telling your friends to tell your parents?
I mean, it was extremely hard waiting. But at that point in time, I felt like the world wasn't ready to know yet. The world wasn't ready to hear about transgender issues. Like they weren't ready to accept it. Looking back, it wasn't easy, and I feel that like a lot of people that talk about their transition kind of skip over the parts that they struggled with, and I think that it's really important for people to understand that when you're going through something like this, that society isn't as a whole ready to accept yet, that it puts a lot of pressure on you to be perfect, and to be that example that like society will accept. When someone in your family is transgender or gay or anything like that, it's a coming out process for the entire family.
And Roz, once you wrapped your mind around this new reality, how did you relate to Hunter?
We have a great relationship, so I feel very thankful. In fact, at one point I said to Hunter that I was so glad he was able to figure this out, and that while I wouldn't wish this on anyone because it's rough, that I was glad he was able to figure it out and we were able to help him. And he looked at me and he said, I wouldn't change a thing. You know, so that meant a lot, and those words spoke volumes. And yeah, we've been able to develop a very close bond and a great mother-son relationship, and I feel very grateful.
Hunter, when do you feel that you've fully transitioned?
I feel like I have. I mean, I've lived fully as male for the past 5 years now. And honestly, I don't feel like there's anything else that I need to do. I've had chest surgery, I'm on hormones.
And it's lifelong. So while he doesn't feel that any other measures need to be taken, when someone is on hormones, it is a lifetime of being on hormones. So,
and you can stop whenever you want to as well.
Correct, but it's not like, well, I've done this one time or I've done this for a period of time and now I'm done. And if he wants to continue to physically appear and sound male and feel internally, and so that his hormone levels aren't all over the place, he needs to continue to take male hormones.
As a family that has successfully navigated this challenging life change, what's your message, your advice to other families who might be struggling with this issue?
What we did to create some resources that were sorely needed in the community was we founded a nonprofit called Stand With Trans. We have 20 support groups in and around the metropolitan Detroit area. As far as Kalamazoo, Grand Rapids, Lansing, we're out of Macomb. We are just launching in Royal Oak at Beaumont Health. So those support groups are critical. I've had parents say these groups are life-saving for our family. So we have youth support groups, we have parent support groups, young child groups, because you need community. You need to be able to talk about the challenges you're facing with other people who get it, and with other people who have maybe a different perspective or who have been there. We started a group called Ally Parents, which is a national program. We have a list of nearly 300 parents who are all parents of trans individuals. They've been vetted, they've gone through background checks, and the link is on the Stand With Trans website. You can call or text any of these parents and just, you know, chat about a particular issue or challenge. A lot of times the youth will text and say, I don't know how to tell my mom. I don't know how to, you know, I don't drive yet. I can't get to any resources. So it really is love at the other end of the phone for the people who access the service.
It started with the death of a trans kid.
Of a young trans woman.
The parents were completely unaccepting. And so we kind of thought, like, what if it didn't have to be your parents that was accepting of you, but it was a parent? And so it's a way for these kids to have an accepting adult in their lives, because that makes a huge difference. You just need one person that gets it, you know?
Right.
You need one person that's willing to love you and willing to care for you and listen to how your day was. And that's how really that started, is just like a way for parents and for kids that don't necessarily have all the support at home to find that support in a family.
Yeah, well said. There are just too many out there who are turned away from their families when they come out and have nowhere to go and feel unsafe, or they're bullied at school and they feel like they can't come out at home, and there's no safety net. So we really try to create resources where the confidence will be boosted, they can take away skill sets, they're building communities so they can find peers to connect with who understand what it's like to be trans. Hunter has been able to step up and be that voice, and I mean, every single time I'm blown away. I am so proud of you, because this is a kid that couldn't give a speech in class. He couldn't even read off of note cards. It just, the whole notion of standing up in front of a group would just
panic attacks,
would send him into a tailspin.
He could up and stuff like that.
Awful.
My anxiety was extremely bad.
Yeah, and now he's, you know, stepping up to microphones and speaking in front of audiences, and can articulate not only what it's like to be transgender and to have transitioned, but from a family perspective, from a community perspective, there are so many lessons.
So through your pain, you found your power, and that's empowering other people.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that I really live by, because I mean, one of the most common questions I get asked is that if I could go back and be born male, would I? And maybe when I first started transitioning, I'd say yes, but at this point, no. At this point, I feel like what I've been through and what I've grown into, it's based so much off of my experiences, that like I wouldn't be who I was today if I hadn't gone through so many trials, and if I hadn't grown up the way that I had. I think that it's my experience that's created who I am, and I don't know who I'd be if I wasn't.
Thank you for joining us today and for sharing the transgender journey of Hunter Keith and his family. If you'd like to learn more about this or any mental health issue, please visit our website, myhealthymind.com. Follow us on Twitter at myhealthymind and on Facebook. We'll see you next week for another edition of My Healthy Mind. Let's talk about it.